The House is nearing a final vote on President Trump's big, beautiful bill after Republican leadership overcame resistance from some GOP holdouts in an overnight session. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries delayed the vote by delivering the longest House speech on record, saying he would highlight the Americans who would suffer because of the bill.
I rise today in strong opposition to Donald Trump's one big, ugly bill. This disgusting abomination, the GOP tax scam that guts Medicaid, rips food from the mouths of children, seniors, and veterans, and rewards billionaires with massive tax breaks. Every single Democrat stands in strong opposition to this bill because we're standing up for the American people.
Now let's take you live now to House Speaker Mike Johnson. He is currently speaking on the floor. Take a listen.
Extraordinary nation that we are blessed to live in. We can lay another sturdy foundation for the future of this country, a future where working Americans can feel relief, where government can finally start living within its means again, and where the United States is safer, stronger, and more prosperous than ever before. That's right. Now, I'm going to say this as they mock America and mock everything and mock the bill. We'll see how the people feel about that.
Yeah.
So listen, seriously, as friends and colleagues, really, across the aisle, what we celebrate tomorrow is the nation's birthday. Let's put the politics aside for a minute, and let's reflect on our blessings. No kidding, really. Tomorrow is the 249th birthday of our nation, and that's right. I mean this sincerely. I thank my colleagues for standing. We all should be united in that. We are. We have squabbles, we have partisan debates and all of this, but at the end of the day, we're all Americans, man. And we gotta believe that. We gotta know it. We gotta recognize that we live in the greatest nation in the history of the world. It's not even close. My friends and colleagues, we are so blessed. We should not take it for granted. We live in the most free, the most successful, the most powerful, the most benevolent nation that has ever been on the face of the earth. And there's a reason for that. The reason that we are the greatest nation is because we were built on the ultimate foundation. And the bold declaration that my friend Hakeem Jeffries articulated earlier is true. We unite under that. The bold declaration that we do hold these truths to be self-evident. What is a self-evident truth? It's something that's obvious. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. It does not say born equal. It says created equal. And that it is our Creator, yes. It is our Creator that gives us our rights. See, the powerful thing about that is we're the first nation in the history of the world that acknowledged that our rights do not derive from government. They come from God Himself. You see those words up there, that motto, it says, "In God we trust," right above the Speaker's rostrum. You know, a previous Congress put that there in the early 60s in the height of the Cold War. There's a little visitor's guide that people get when you do tours late at night. You've probably seen your constituents and visitors and friends get the guide. If you turn, I think it's about to page 21. It explains why that's there. And it says, Congress voted to put that there as a rebuke to the Soviets' worldview at the height of the Cold War. Why? Because communism, socialism, find their root in Marxism. And Marxism begins with the belief that there is no God. It's wrong. And this Congress made us stand those many years ago, and we should do it again. We're different, we're distinct, we're exceptional, because we acknowledge that right there, our motto. It doesn't say in government we trust. It says in God we trust. And we better remember that. He has blessed us with his grand experiment in self-governance now for almost 2.5 centuries. And by God's grace, we are working hard and we are delivering on our promise to make America great again. This is without a doubt the most important vote of this Congress, and I think this may be the most important vote that any of us take in our entire lifetimes. And everybody better remember it, however you vote today. My friends, the President of the United States is waiting with his pen. The American people are waiting for this relief. We've heard enough talk. It's time for action. Let's finish the job for him. Vote yes on the bill. With that, I yield back.
We've been listening to the House Speaker. We have team coverage of the spending bill. CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro has a reaction from the president, and CBS News political reporter Zach Hudak is on Capitol Hill. Zach, let's start with you. What's the reaction been like so far?
Among Republicans, it is very excited. This is probably the largest legislative victory of this term for President Trump. They met the deadline that he self-imposed on them, and this is an enormous victory for them, despite all of the troubles along the way. It seems like with the slim majority that Republicans have, nearly every vote that is a major vote comes down to the last moment like this one did. This is a big victory for them. Meanwhile, Democrats are looking at this as an opportunity to increase their messaging in battleground districts and really hammer home the messaging that Republicans, in passing this bill, are taking away health care from some Americans. They're taking away hospital funding. They are increasing the deficit, and they are lowering taxes on the richest Americans. So in some ways, for both parties, it is a victory, but there is no question the bigger victory is for Republicans who got through the largest chunk of Donald Trump's agenda that they have this year.
Well, you know, the White House has been putting significant pressure on Republican holdouts this week. Does it seem like it was effective?
It certainly does, particularly last night, where we know that President Trump was making calls to holdouts and even making some deals, according to some of those holdouts, to support initiatives that they are interested in and would like him to use the bully pulpit to give some extra strength to. It's a fascinating dynamic that we have in this Congress, with Mike Johnson acting as the Speaker of the House, but in some ways, Donald Trump acting as either the Speaker of the House or the whip. We see him publicly on Truth Social, but also behind closed doors, making calls and really putting pressure on these members. He has more power than a typical president would in doing that because of how strong his support is among his base. When it comes down to Republicans who are in very red districts, they actually have to worry, if they go against what he wants, that he will say they should not hold their seat anymore. He will endorse someone who's trying to primary them and win the GOP nomination, which in those safe Republican districts would equate to winning the seat. So it's a very interesting dynamic where we see President Trump really playing legislator and making deals. And I think that even Mike Johnson would say he could not have done it without the president.
You know, some of the cuts that we've seen outlined in the bill are not scheduled to take effect until after the 2026 midterm elections. What do you know about the strategy behind that timing?
It certainly is good for Republicans in terms of they will not be able to be hit by Democrats who are saying, look at these people who lost health care they had. Look at these hospitals that lost funding they were getting. It delays that until after the election. So it means that pretty much anything that Democrats are hitting Republicans are in this bill is hypothetical. It's them saying these things are going to happen, as opposed to them being concrete things that could happen. So I think it was a very savvy move for Republicans to do that, and it certainly blunts some of the force of the attacks that Democrats will be making from now until those midterms.
Interesting, Zach. You know, we're going to stay with this and stay on this story until we have an outcome of this vote. And so for more on this, we're going to bring in our CBS News White House reporter, Aaron Navarro. Aaron, good to see you. What is the White House saying about this measure? What's the confidence level, would you say?
Well, and one measure of their confidence level, hours before this final vote's expected to happen, we learned that the White House planned a bill signing ceremony tomorrow afternoon at the White House. So once they get that over that procedural type of vote overnight, where the House had to essentially prove the Senate version of what they have called, quote, the one big beautiful bill, that's when you saw President Trump in his tone start to change. As they were going through that procedure, the president posted saying, what are Republicans waiting for? He suggested that his base may turn on some of those House Republicans who are still holdouts, who may vote against the legislature or against this legislation. And then this morning, he said after that, procedural vote happened, he said, what a great night. So he is pleased that it has, gotten to the finish line here. We heard from the National Economic Council Director, Kevin Hassett, who also seemed pleased and ready for this bill to cross the finish line. He really credited, and you talked to Zach about this just a minute ago, he credited President Trump for working the phones heavily, especially yesterday when it was kind of at that final step for this bill to cross the finish line. The fact that it is nearly there is something that the White House is celebrating. I'm refreshing Truth Social, too, to see if the president has any snap reaction for when that vote ends up happening.
Aaron, I'm curious to know who you think has walked away as an unexpected winner in this long, dramatic process from the perspective of the White House.
Yeah, I think there was some conversation, right, between President Trump and Elon Musk in particular, and the sway that they have over the Republican Party throughout this whole legislative process. You saw Elon Musk, once a big advisor, a notable advisor here at the White House, saying that he was going to primary House Republicans that support this, and it didn't really dissuade any congressional Republicans that weren't already on the fence from voting against this legislation. It continues to show the sway that President Trump has politically over the Republican Party, which is an important storyline to watch going into the 2026 midterms and essentially the last couple of years of President Trump's term in office. How much political sway does he have, considering he's, quote, a lame duck president? Getting this big budget and spending bill passed shows the political capital that President Trump continues to have over his party.
Aaron, there's been a lot of changes in this legislation as it's wound its way through the House and Senate. Do you think President Trump is good with these changes and all of these new details?
Yeah, what we heard from NEC Director Kevin Hassett is that President Trump had already looked through some of the Senate changes last night and approved of them. At the point, I do think the president was just eager to get this across the finish line. Maybe a week or so ago when he was asked about that July 4 deadline to get it passed, he maybe seemed a little bit wishy-washy. He was like, as long as it gets passed, I'm happy with it. But as we got into this week, he made clear he wants it on his desk by this Friday. So we've been told that he's reviewed the specifics, whether he has any problems. We have not heard that publicly, at least. But in terms of the whole bill as it stands, he certainly is eager to put his signature on it.
Aaron, we're watching the tally right now, split down party lines. And we also know it's been reported that President Trump did not want this bill to touch Medicaid. Can you pull back the curtain on that? What is that dynamic right now?
Yeah, this has been something that the Democratic Party has pointed out to, in part because it'll really impact the federal funding for Medicaid. It essentially will put more of the onus on states, which could really vary from state to state, whether you're in Democratic or Republican control, whether Medicaid was already expanded or not. There are concerns that the funding for rural hospitals will significantly decrease, and a lot of those hospitals happen to be in strongly Republican districts. So given that potential political vulnerability, I've been watching to see how the White House congressional Republicans respond. So far, the company line has been that these cuts are specific to targeting, quote, waste, fraud, and abuse, particularly the one that requires employment for those to have Medicaid. And they've really tried to redirect the focus to other big wins, according to Republicans in this bill, such as funding for protection on the southern border, as well as a continuation of the 2017 Trump tax cuts. So that's been the line I've been hearing from Republicans. But obviously, as we get closer to the 2026 elections, you can see Democrats really continue to bring up what this does in terms of Medicaid and Medicare.
Aaron Navarro, thank you so much for that reporting from the White House. We also have CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady here with me. Thanks so much for being here.
Of course.
It's great to see you. You know, this bill is projected to add trillions to the national debt. Explain to us what this actually means for regular taxpayers.
Well, so here's the thing. I mean, this is intended to extend the 2017 tax cuts. And the idea would be, okay, if you and I have more money in our pocketbooks and businesses have more money to invest, that's going to spur economic growth. And so I sort of liken this to what we saw in COVID when we got stimulus checks. People have more money in their pocketbooks. They're more likely to go out and spend. That doesn't always happen, though. You go back to the 60s, you go back to the 80s, the Kennedy and Reagan tax cuts. That did spur economic growth. 2017, economists are mixed in terms of what happened under the first Trump administration. You mentioned the deficit, though, and I think that's a really important point because you and I aren't going to feel that tomorrow. It's going to be our kids, our grandkids, potentially less funding for social and public programs, potentially a bond market that has a little bit of a tantrum, because what does that mean if the U.S. economy has more debt? Maybe it defaults in the future. You start to see investors get a little bit more uncomfortable with a country continuing to rack up its debt. Now, obviously, the Republicans tend to be more fiscally conservative, want to lower that deficit. The promises coming out of this is long term. You're going to see the deficit cut down, that it's not going to be adding. I think this is sort of a wait and see type of thing.
I'm watching the clock behind you, time remaining 5 minutes and 30 seconds as we discuss the economic impact of this bill. I'm curious to know, when you think about now through the next 5 years, impact on the economy. You and I both cover so much of the day-to-day stuff. What do you see as the 5-year outlook for someone who's thinking about, what is this going to do to my family's budget? And what about, say you want to get into the housing market and buy a home?
Well, it's really going to depend on what income bracket you're in, because, of course, there are different tax cuts for different income brackets. I think when it comes to the housing market, this is very interesting because we go back to that deficit point. What happens, I mentioned, to the bond market?
Yes.
When you have the lower possibility of interest rates, when you have a deficit that's running up, investors feel that they need more of a return to buy government debt, to invest in essentially the U.S. economy. And what that does is it drives up interest rates on your 30-year fixed, because your mortgage tracks the 10-year Treasury. And I've been watching this closely. It hasn't performed the way that you would want it to if you are looking to buy a home. Now, of course, there's so many other dynamics at play. And frankly, it's hard to make a 5-year prediction because no one in March of 2020 would have predicted where things went. But based on what we know, it's really going to depend on your income bracket.
Well, there's no perspective quite like Kelly O'Grady. So thank you so much for being here on set with us today. We're going to go back to Zach Hudak on Capitol Hill. Zach, time is winding down. We have a few minutes left, about 4 minutes left. The vote is, as predicted, completely falling along party lines. What's the vibe on Capitol Hill right now? What's the energy?
It is a very positive energy among Republicans who see this as a path out of a very difficult battle toward actually enacting large portions of President Trump's agenda. So it is very positive in general among Republicans. I think there are some Republicans who are concerned about explaining some of these cuts, particularly the Medicare cuts, Medicaid cuts, when they go back to their districts. Among them, I would assume Brian Fitzpatrick, who I don't believe has cast his vote yet, but who voted against the roll last night. He was the sole Republican voting against it. Another is Thomas Massey, a more libertarian member, who is the sole vote against the bill currently among Republicans. That's someone who has been vocal with his concerns with this bill, and who Donald Trump has targeted directly on Truth Social repeatedly. So someone who's been under a lot of pressure, but who realizes that he's also under a lot of pressure from his district and from folks who do not want to see some of these cuts. So the vibe overall is jubilant among Republicans, but there are a few of them who you can tell are a bit stressed about heading home for the long weekend.
I can only imagine. And we also know that House Speaker Mike Johnson has really been working the shoe leather on the phone, and this could be seen as a key victory for him. How was the administration able to overcome that resistance from within the party, and where did Johnson factor into all of this?
Johnson has really pulled off an incredible feat, even if only by remaining Speaker of the House as long as he did. We saw this particular GOP cast out his predecessor, Kevin McCarthy, who was a fairly well-liked member on the Hill. He had some enemies, but had many friends up here. So this is a particular House GOP that you have to be cautious if you are going to try to be the leader of it, and you have to be very calculated with each step you take. I think Johnson is very well liked and trusted by both ends of the GOP, and I think that was helpful. And I think the other key X factor is that he's very, very good at working with President Trump and strategizing together. We saw President Trump posting on Truth Social, making calls to members and whipping votes along with Johnson. I think the key to Johnson's success has been his ability to work in conjunction with Donald Trump and work in conjunction with Donald Trump in a way that Donald Trump has not acted out in ways that we've seen him do in the past, aside from some strongly worded Truth Socials about members who aren't falling in line. He has acted really as a member of House leadership and, as I said, whipping votes and making deals. So I think it's that partnership that has allowed Johnson to get this done. And as I've said a few times here, it really is an amazing feat that, as we've seen, has taken well over 24 hours straight here.
Certainly a lot of drama on Capitol Hill. And during that procedural vote overnight, Representative Brian Fitzpatrick was the sole Republican, as you mentioned, to vote against advancing the rule. So do we know if what's happening with him and what he plans to do?
We do not. I think that his vote against the rule is an indication that he will likely vote against the bill itself. It's often the case. But there are also times where a member will vote against the rule in order to show their lack of support for the bill or even try to help hold it up. But then they actually will vote for the bill in the end because they don't want to be ostracized by their party or attacked for being one of the dissenters. I will say that Brian Fitzpatrick was very cautious last night to get out of the chamber and out of Capitol Hill after his vote in a way that reporters were not able to find him, and that I think, more importantly, his fellow members were not able to track him down and corner him and really put him on the spot. So we don't know what he'll do, but I think there's a possibility he'll be a no vote.
Zach, as you were talking there, the clock ticked all the way down to 0, and we see a preliminary vote of 216 to 213. And as you hear that, 216 to 214, excuse me, that just flipped. And so as you process that, Zach, what does that number tell you there on Capitol Hill?
It means, frankly, that we got as close to the margins as humanly possible for Republicans to pull out a victory. They could not bear to give up one more no vote, assuming that those remaining two who've not cast their votes yet vote with them. They will get over. But they really only had 3 to spare total. So assuming that those two who have not cast their votes vote as we expect them to in favor of the bill, this will get through. But if those two do not do so, it would hold things up. So we really are, by the closest possible margins, getting this bill by.
The closest possible margin. So then the natural question, what is the next move for Democrats in terms of pushing back against some of the articles in the bill, particularly those that they have been hitting on over the past, several days, healthcare, social programs, things like that?
It's going to be messaging. It's going to be getting out to those districts, particularly the battleground ones. We heard of Leader Jeffries point out particularly David Belladano and Juan Ciscomani, who are in districts that Democrats are targeting specifically. So I think we're going to see ads go up in those districts, really tying members like those members to the vote and explaining to voters, look, this is going to take away health care benefits. This is going to take away hospital funding. This is going to increase tax cuts for the rich. And really trying to hammer home to voters that for many of them, this is a bill that does not help them. So I think really the next step for Democrats is to continue what Hakeem Jeffries began today, which is the counterpunch of extreme messaging and trying, hopefully, for them to win back the House in the midterms.
I want to go back, Zach, thank you. Fantastic analysis from the Hill as this is all unfolding live. I want to go back to CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro. Have we heard anything else from the White House? We know the president is always very quick to react on Truth Social. Have we heard anything yet?
Yeah, nothing yet on Truth Social. You're starting to see some statements trickle out from White House officials, Deputy Chief of Staff, and during his campaign, a key political director, James Blair, posted thanking the White House Legislative Affairs team for getting this bill across the finish line. James wrote, quote, "It is the most consequential piece of Republican legislation in decades." We know that at least tonight, while he is speaking on the Iowa State Fair grounds, President Trump will be listing this bill as part of his, quote, accomplishments. That's what one White House official told us in a preview of his speech there. So he's definitely taking it directly to the people that will be impacted by this bill, at least tonight in Iowa.
Aaron, I'm curious to know, so many families are gathering for the 4th of July holiday, and you mentioned getting the message to Iowa, but what do you think the White House's goal here is for that barbecue conversation when it comes to this legislation?
Yeah, I mean, it's been something that they're going to be talking about and celebrating, in a sense, during the July 4th festivities. We've also heard potentially that the president may go out and travel to really play up the impacts of this bill. But just to touch on the point you made earlier, Democrats are just as eager to get on the road and potentially criticize this bill as well. We learned earlier today that California Governor Gavin Newsom, potential 2028 candidate, should he choose to do so, will be in the Palmetto State in South Carolina next week. We've seen him be critical about this bill. Other governors like Josh Shapiro, J.B. Pritzker of Illinois. So it's certainly fodder for when you think about 2028. But in terms of, the near term, the fact that some of the Medicaid cuts may not take effect until after the 2026 midterms could potentially help Republicans. But the White House is certainly celebrating at least this phase of it passing. We'll see how they look to amplify, positive sentiment about the bill in the coming weeks.
Aaron, it looks as we follow this, there's one vote remaining, which means the GOP, preliminarily at least, has the votes to pass this bill. So as we look ahead to impact and also, sort of that early stage legacy, is there a sense that this bill will be the defining piece of legislation in the second term, at least so far?
Yeah, it definitely has the potential to be, because, control of Congress could change in just a year or so, and going into the last 2 years of President Trump's term. I think that's part of the reason why he really pushed to get this across the finish line now, why he, as Zach mentioned, really played an outsized role in whipping Republican votes in Congress. Another big part of this that the White House and officials have been playing up are his 2017, Trump tax cuts staying in place throughout the rest of his term and the coming years. That has been something, as the president has defended this bill in recent months, is something he has always pointed back to, suggesting that should his tax cuts expire, as they were set to do later this year, that people's taxes could go up. And that was kind of the argument he made in part for this bill. So certainly it is one big swing that the president took to get a lot of his legislative priorities when it comes to taxes, the economy, when it comes to immigration, and this may be the best political window for him to do so in his second term.
In terms of immediate impact, Aaron, I know we talk a lot about process and horse race and what this could mean in the next few minutes, next few days. But when you look at this legislation and you look at what's coming out of the White House, what do you think the first impact will be?
I think the first impact may be when people are starting to file their tax returns next April. The White House has argued that the tax, cuts, the tax status remaining at the status quo will be the first immediate impact. People won't be seeing their taxes go up, as the White House has argued. But some of the early estimates is that people's tax returns could also increase as well going into April. Again, it's interesting, though, as you have talked about earlier in this hour, that some of the more controversial cuts to Medicaid, Medicare take place down the line after the 2026 midterms. So some of the really heavy impacts that people could be feeling are later down the line. But at least fiscally, that seems to be what the White House is suggesting people will benefit most from in the immediate term.
Aaron Navarro, thank you so much. And by the way, it's exactly 2:30 Eastern time here on the East Coast. And if you're just joining us now, you can take a look at a live look at the House floor, where we're getting that preliminary vote coming in, 217 to 214 on President Trump's mega bill. And we are waiting for that final vote to come in. And I'd like to go back to Capitol Hill. Let's bring back Zach Hudak to tell us about, what is happening? We see 217 to 214, one NV left, one vote left to be cast, I should say. How long could we be waiting for this one? Who is it?
The leadership of whichever party controls the House at any given time has control over when the floor opens and when it closes. So even though that time limit is up, this could theoretically go on indefinitely. What we see happening on the floor there with all the members bunched together is a pressure campaign on that last remaining voter to try to get them to vote in favor of the bill. I think Republicans want that vote, want a strong victory. And I think that as a result, Mike Johnson is leaving the floor open as long as they have to get that vote where they want it. The truth is, even after that vote is cast, they could leave the floor open and try to force folks to change their votes. And that just illustrates really the advantage you have when you are the majority party in the House of Representatives. You control when the vote starts and when the vote ends. So I would expect this to end any moment.
I hate to interrupt you, but it does look like we have a final vote, 218 to 214.
Change a vote.
Largely along those party lines as expected. It looks like it's wrapped up a little quicker than we may have expected. What do you think?
I think that's right. But I think what we just witnessed with that slight delay at the end was the pressure campaign I was explaining. They were ready to leave it open a little bit longer if they needed to, but they were clearly able to convince that last member that dissenting
Zach,
would not leave.
Pardon the interruption here. We are going to go to Speaker Johnson, who's now speaking from the dais.
Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
All right, we heard a bunch of chants there from lawmakers clapping, chanting USA, USA. Speaker Johnson briefly taking the seat there, and now he's coming back down off of the podium. Let's bring back Zach, who's on Capitol Hill with us. I like to get into the nitty-gritty here, and Zach Hudak on Capitol Hill. What do we know about some of these last-minute concessions that the White House made to some of the GOP holdouts? What were those last final conversations like?
We've been hearing some details from some of those members and hits they've done on cable and things like that, but we've not heard from the president. So I'd want to hold off till I hear from him what he's actually agreed to. But they are basically him promising to use his bully pulpit, his megaphone as the president, to support other initiatives that those members are interested in. And it's something that was particularly important for members in particularly red districts, because those members have to be able to go home this weekend for 4th of July and explain to their constituents who in those red districts want to see spending pulled back. They have to explain why the deficit is going to be raised $3 trillion for this bill. So by having a few concessions or a few things that the president said he'll help them out with, it helps them as they give that message to their constituents. They get to say, okay, we are going to be spending some more money, but the president has promised he's going to help us out on this, which will help you specifically. So I think that's why that was so impactful, particularly with those hardline Republicans.
Zach, the House has now officially adjourned. They passed President Trump's mega bill, 218 to 214. We're going to go back now to the White House, to our CBS News White House reporter, Aaron Navarro. Aaron, the bill is officially passed through the House. What do you expect the president to say in terms of a victory, which he will clearly see this as in his eyes?
Yeah, he will certainly tout it as an accomplishment of his agenda, his second term so far. One White House official tells us he's going to bring it up tonight during his remarks at the Iowa State Fairgrounds, where he will largely talk about, celebrating the anniversary of America and his 250th anniversary going into next year. But it's certainly something the White House, the president, has, projected confidence that it will pass, but at the same time, taking no expense. We saw that President Trump worked the phones a lot yesterday to get some of these Republican holdouts to vote in favor of the bill. But I'm refreshing Truth Social just in case he has any reactive statement. But so far, it feels like the next time we'll hear from him react to the passing of this bill will be in Iowa.
You mentioned earlier that there's already plans underway for a ceremonial bill signing at the White House. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that'll be tomorrow afternoon, where he will sign the bill in a public event here at the White House, potentially right before some of the July 4th festivities, before he heads to Bedminster, New Jersey. So it's been something that the White House, even hours before the actual vote happened, telegraphed that they were confident that there would be some sort of big ceremony, and that's expected for tomorrow afternoon.
So, Aaron, what happens next now that this presumably will be signed in the coming hours and days? Once President Trump finishes that, what should people expect to be next in terms of the top priority on his agenda?
Certainly, foreign policy seems to be something that on the side and potentially going into this weekend is going to be at the forefront for President Trump. We know that he spoke to Russian President Putin earlier today. We have heard developments when it comes to Special Envoy Steve Witkoff working with Israel, an intermediary to work with Hamas in terms of getting a ceasefire between Israel and Gaza. So the focus may turn back to that. It may shift to immigration. You saw the president visit what has been dubbed, quote, Alligator Alcatraz in Florida earlier this week. But this certainly was something that President Trump had put a lot of political capital behind, at least in terms of getting this bill passed.
Aaron Navarro hanging with us for the last 36 minutes and 30 seconds through all of that breaking news and the final vote there in the House. Thank you so much for being with us today.